Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GBNews.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
An intriguing and very Boris idea.
This is Dewbs and Co, the show where... And I'll cry if I want to. Remember that? Well, I'll tell you a couple of people that might be crying tonight. Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. They've been handed fixed penalty notices by the Met Police. Many are saying they must resign. But I say, really? Come on. What about you? What do you think? And Britain's armed forces ministers warned President Putin that, I quote, all options are on the table following unconfirmed reports of the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine. What does that mean? And it's only right that a light is shone on the appalling goings-on in Shanghai, China right now. Have you seen what's happening? Babies and children separated from their parents, animals being clubbed to death, people not receiving basic food and drink. I could go on, but you get the point. Why is all this happening? Well, the government's desperate and I would say completely deluded quest to achieve zero COVID. Why would any country be trying to entirely eradicate COVID? Surely that is a fool's errand. And parents should question their attitudes to race if their toddler only has white friends. That's according to the BBC's early years guidance. Surely children just see other children, don't they? Why are so many people desperate? It feels like, anyway, to try and make everything about skin colour. All of that to come, but first, the latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. The top story this hour. Downing Street says the Prime Minister is going to be fined over his birthday party held during lockdown in June 2020. The Metropolitan Police say the lockdown-breaking event took place for an hour in the Cabinet Room at number 10 Downing Street. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and the Prime Minister's wife are also fined over the lockdown breaches in Downing Street and Whitehall. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says it's a slap in the face for those who obeyed the rules.
Relatives they didn't see, funerals they didn't go to, weddings they didn't go to, even the birth of their own children. But the guilty men are the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. They've dishonoured all of that sacrifice. They've dishonoured their office. Never in our history has a Prime Minister been found to have broken the law. And then he lied to the public about it.
It's Keir Starmer. Well, in the United States, police in New York are searching for a gunman who threw down a smoke bomb and opened fire in a crowded subway carriage, injuring at least 16 people. And a warning, the pictures we're going to show on TV may upset some viewers. Officials say 10 people to 16 people appear to be shot in the incident. It happened during the morning commute at 36th Street Station, that's Sunset Park in Brooklyn in New York. The whereabouts of the perpetrator, said to be a black male wearing a gas mask, is unclear. New York City's police commissioner says it's not currently being treated as terrorism and the motive still unclear.
Just before 8:24 this morning, as a Manhattan-bound N train waited to enter the 36th Street Station, an individual on that train donned what appeared to be a gas mask. He then took a canister out of his bag and opened it. The train at that time began to fill with smoke. He then opened fire, striking multiple people on the subway and in the platform.
Well, that news conference taking place a short time ago. Well, here in the UK, there's been a warning that all options will be on the table when it comes to the West's response if Russia uses chemical weapons in Ukraine. The government says it's working urgently to verify claims that chemical weapons were used in an attack on the southern city of Mariupol yesterday. The mayor there saying an estimated 21,000 civilians have been killed in his city since the start of the invasion. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says thousands of civilians have also been deported from occupied regions of Ukraine and placed into what he's describing as filtration camps.
Documents are taken away from them, they are interrogated, humiliated. It is unclear how many people were killed. Many of those who were deported were sent across Russian regions. They are forbidden to leave. It is obvious that it is an attempt to get rid of witnesses of Russian war crimes committed in Ukraine.
Well, meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin says attempts to isolate his country from the rest of the world will fail. He was speaking in Russia's Far East, where he met up with his Belarusian counterpart. Vladimir Putin also said Moscow will never depend on the United States or its allies again after they imposed crippling sanctions on Russia. And he repeated his country's ambitions in Ukraine, saying the military operation will achieve its goals. Now, in the UK, 3 victims of grooming gangs in Rochdale have received substantial damages and a personal apology from Greater Manchester Police. Chief Constable Stephen Watson apologised for failings when women were raped and abused by gangs of men as children. Police failed to record the crimes, investigate the offenders, collect intelligence, or charge or prosecute the abusers. It happened under the previous chief constables, including Sir Peter Fahey and his predecessor. A man has been found guilty of murdering his partner's 3-year-old son. The jury at Birmingham Crown Court heard how KEMARNI Watson Derby had endured horrendous beatings likened to the impact of a car crash. The boy's mother, Alicia Watson, was cleared of murder but found guilty of causing or allowing his death. She and convicted drug dealer Nathaniel Pope were both also convicted of child cruelty and will be sentenced next month. The number of people on payrolls rose by 35,000 between February and March, but the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics also showed workers suffered the biggest fall in real pay for almost 9 years. Experts are warning wages are set to lag even further behind, with inflation expected to soar by the autumn. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Now it's time for Michelle and Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, I've got to say, I'm covered in goosebumps after that story about that little boy, yet another child killed by the partner of their parent. What is going on in this world? Honestly, you know, I could do a whole show about it, and it's just truly heartbreaking, isn't it? It's so very, very sad. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight, my panel, James Woodhousen, who's a visiting professor at London South Bank University, Lee Jones, who's a professor of political economy and international relations, and Scarlett Maguire, who's a former Labour advisor. And you know the drill on Dewbs and Co by now, don't you? It's not just about us here and our thoughts. No, it is not. It is about you as well at home. What's on your mind? You can get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. Don't forget, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, you can download our app, you can listen to us on the radio. We're everywhere, so wherever you are, you're very welcome tonight. Now, let's get straight into it, shall we? You cannot fail to have noticed by now that the Prime Minister, his wife, Carrie, and the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, have been fined for breaking lockdown laws. It's been confirmed that the three had received notification of the fines from the Met Police following an investigation into the illegal parties in Downing Street, of course, during the COVID lockdowns. It's got to be said, a little while ago, both Boris and Carrie confirmed now that they'd paid their fines. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, joins us live from Downing Street. Good evening to you, Darren. What's the latest?
Yeah, good evening, Michelle. Well, in the last couple of minutes, we've heard from the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who's been speaking to journalists at Chequers, the country retreat he is at this week. He has made it clear that he has now paid that fixed penalty notice, as you say, along with his wife, Carrie Johnson, I should say, and he apologises for the mistake I have made. He says that, once again, he wants to offer a full apology. People expect better, and I have a responsibility to deliver that. So the Prime Minister, perhaps unsurprisingly, apologising and saying that he has paid that fine in full. And now kind of making the case, if you like, Michelle, that he gets how serious this all is. He gets the obligation around being kind of Prime Minister, if you like, and that he needs to deliver on the agenda that he has set out that he won the 2019 election on. But this is, of course, incredibly politically damaging for the Prime Minister. There's little doubt about that. We haven't really got an historic precedent in modern times for a Prime Minister effectively breaking the law, a law that he himself brought in. Does that mean, though, that he's in the same political peril that he was just a matter of months ago when his leadership, his prime ministership, seemed like it was genuinely on the line, with lots of Conservative MPs submitting letters to the 1922 committee? I do not think we are there. Many of those MPs, in fact, have come out this afternoon, like Sir Roger Gale, like Douglas Ross, like Andrew Bridgen, saying now is not the time for the Prime Minister to go. So I don't think we're likely to see a leadership challenge anytime soon. However, all I would say is I don't think this is necessarily the end of the matter. This fine that the Prime Minister has faced, alongside the Chancellor and the Prime Minister's wife, is in regards to a birthday party, a surprise one that was held inside the Cabinet Room back in June 2020, one that was actually reported in the Times newspaper at the time, and no one blinked an eyelid back then. I think what has changed, however, is that this seems like it was far from an isolated party, that in retrospect the police have clearly decided it was illegal, and the Prime Minister probably should have known, even if he didn't intentionally break the law, that he should have known that it was an illegal gathering. But more than that is that the police investigations are continuing, and there are allegations of more than a dozen parties in Downing Street and Whitehall, and allegations that the Prime Minister also attended not all but some of them. And I think the concern for Boris Johnson, that while, yes, things have moved on, and while the party at the moment does not feel the need to get rid of him, that he may be fined again in the future. And of course, he's got that full detailed report from Sue Gray, and that again will be a matter of clarity, a big moment for Conservative MPs when they'll have to reassess their support for Boris Johnson.
Yeah, and Darren, just a couple of questions. There's been lots of people saying that Parliament should be recalled so that, you know, there can be potentially a vote of no confidence taking place. Do you think that's likely to happen?
No, I just don't think it is, Michelle. It's a pretty big thing to recall Parliament. Parliament is in recess, of course, for the Easter period. It is back next week. Only the government, only the Prime Minister can effectively recall Parliament in conjunction with the Speaker. I think Boris Johnson's unlikely to do that, given the situation he is in. The opposition parties, even though they want a vote of no confidence, I don't think are going to get it. If Boris Johnson was to lose his job, it would not be at the behest of them, but rather MPs within the Conservative Party. But the Prime Minister has said he will appear in front of MPs when this is all concluded, when Sue Gray's report is issued. But as I say, that could be weeks, months away, even yet.
Yeah, and lastly as well, I'm also hearing calls for a recall petition to be put in place. Is that, again, something that is likely to happen?
Again, I think it's unlikely. I mean, there's always the possibility, isn't there, that a certain percentage of an MP's constituents can put forward a recall motion. I don't think we're there with this. But, you know, this is damaging for the Prime Minister. And I know people sometimes say they don't care and it was only a surprise birthday bash, and that it's akin to essentially receiving a driving offence fine, a speeding fine, or a parking fine. I think it's different in the sense that would be true if these weren't extraordinary laws that were brought in, imposed on everyone, and mandated by the government. And the very fact that the police, no one else but the police, have found that at least on one occasion the Prime Minister broke those rules when he himself set them, means that there will be some reputational damage to the Prime Minister. There's an instant YouGov poll out tonight that suggests that 75% of people think that the Prime Minister has misled people on all of this. At the time, of course, he said that no rules had been broken and the guidance had been followed, and 57% think he should resign. So clearly there are a lot of people pretty angry out there, but I think where we are right now, politically, it is incredibly unlikely that the Prime Minister is going to resign, and it's also incredibly unlikely that MPs will move against him. In many ways, as his supporters would point out, it feels like the political momentum has very much moved on.
Darren McCaffrey, fascinating stuff. Thank you for that. Well, Keir Starmer's been asked about this a little bit earlier on. Let's see what he had to say.
Has the Prime Minister misled the House?
Yes, and that's why I think of all those people who obeyed the rules, did the right thing, and it's a real slap in the face for them. They made heart-wrenching decisions, and they feel incredible guilt for relatives they didn't see, funerals they didn't go to, weddings they didn't go to, even the birth of their own children. But the guilty men are the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. They've dishonoured all of that sacrifice. They've dishonoured their office. Never in our history has a Prime Minister been found to have broken the law. And then he lied to the public about it.
Very dramatic there. Scarlett Maguire, I say very dramatic because, you know, I have a lot of sympathy for some of the things that Keir Starmer alluded to there. You know, so many people followed the rules. You didn't you go to funerals. You weren't allowed to stay around after your child had been born, etc., etc. Rules that I would say actually were inhumane.
But made by Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
I mean, let's remember who made those rules.
But be clear, though, what we're talking about here, the current event that he's been fined for, this is on the 19th of June, apparently 2020, on his birthday, up to 30 people gathered in the Cabinet Room at number 10 to present the Prime Minister with a birthday cake and sing happy birthday. Now, they're all at work. It's his birthday. And they just present a cake, sing happy birthday and crack on with their work.
OK, so that's what one of his people said. He was ambushed by cake. Come on. This was a party. Parties were forbidden. I mean, what we know was that...
a party? Has no one ever at work popped up with a cake and said happy birthday? That's not a party.
Well, actually, just because it's at work doesn't mean it's not a party. What gatherings, social gatherings were forbidden. They were forbidden by the Prime Minister. I don't know how many people didn't have birthday parties. I certainly know of a lot of people who did not have birthday parties because they were against the law. But so all of that is really terrible. That this is just one of at least a dozen parties that were held in Downing Street. So, you know, it was Partygate. But actually, he went to the House of Commons and said to the House of Commons, no rules have been broken. So not only did he knowingly break the rules that he'd made, but he then went to the House of Commons and said no rules have been broken. And
So what do you want to happen now, then? Do you think he should resign?
Yeah, I do think he should resign.
Really?
I think what is the point of having a Prime Minister who makes pretty inhumane rules, as you say, and then breaks the ones he finds inconvenient?
So in the middle of a war, pretty much,
we are not at war, right?
I said I didn't say we were. I said in the midst of a war pretty much in Europe, in the midst of a cost of living crisis, you want...
there is certainly a cost of living crisis. Actually, the last Prime Minister who was made to step down by the Conservatives was just at the beginning of the Kuwait war, and it was Mrs Thatcher. And her supporters said, this is crazy, you can't let her go at the beginning of war. And it was a war that we were going to be involved in. So actually, what is going on in Ukraine, there is complete unanimity within the cabinet and within Parliament about what we should do. Of course, this is crazy that suddenly, because we've got a war, Boris Johnson can behave just the way he wants. 57% of the people in a Snap poll think he should go. Well, I mean, I'm not on my own here.
James, I think it is crazy. But what I think is crazy is the response and people calling for this guy, the PM, the Chancellor, to leave right now with everything going on in the world.
Well, for me, the issue isn't the law or parties. And it's something, in fact, Michelle, worse even than the government's antisocial hypocrisy and their mendacity. The real issue here is the utter disdain for the public, which we've come to recognise in Rishi Sunak's desire to live in America once he's, moved on from this job. They have no commitment. No, you can groan, Michelle, but that's a much more substantial mistake that he made than going to a party or taking a cake.
What is
He believes that he can do a nice job in number 11 now and then move on to some nice sinecure in the United States.
Hang on, we have a fixed-term Parliaments Act in this country, so by definition, that job, all of the jobs in parliaments, they have a potential end date to them.
Yeah, but what he's not showing is any commitment to his constituency, the British people, or the long-term view for what needs to be done with economic policy in this country. He can fly off through his international departure lounge and show exactly that contempt for the plebs that we've come to know from Boris and the whole lockdown episode. That's the major charge that should be made against those people.
Lee Jones, am I going to get any sense from this side of the table?
Do you mean, am I going to agree with
Yes, of course I mean that, yes.
you define as good sense?
Yes, definitely.
This is Michelle.
Yes.
I think that the debate is being framed in an unhelpful way. So on the one hand, you've got people screaming at Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak for breaking the rules. And then you've got Tory MPs lining up to say, oh, well, it wasn't that much of a rule breaking. The issue is the rules themselves. That's the problem. That, as Keir Starmer's just said, many people made horrendous sacrifices in the name of containing coronavirus. And what the parties in number 10 revealed was that the very people that were designing and enforcing these rules didn't think that they needed to follow them, which means that they didn't really think that they were necessary for everybody to follow. So the problem is this blanket approach to social restrictions, which was not necessary because COVID was a disease that affected mostly people with severe underlying health conditions and elderly people. So people should be angry, but they should be angry that for 2 years we were placed under an authoritarian regime that controlled our movements, and that was not necessary to contain the disease. I think I sympathise to some extent with what Scarlett's saying, that you cannot just say that, oh, because now there's a war in Europe, we've got to move on from all of this. This was 2 years in which people's lives were wrecked up and down this country. There are still massive questions to be asked about the mishandling of the pandemic.
Oh, I agree with that. Agree with that, for sure.
And this is only the tip of the iceberg. We've got to ask the right questions and not engage in, debates about, oh, is he a bad guy because he broke these rules? We need to look at the bigger issues here.
Yeah, I've got to say, I did always find it quite peculiar that Keir Starmer was also pictured with a beer at that point in time with colleagues. Does anyone remember that? That's
yes,
all gone
he
quiet.
was having supper and some drink alcohol with supper.
Oh.
Let's get into the minutiae. Why not?
Absolutely. Let's absolutely get into minutiae. I'm sure the police have investigated it and found out that you are allowed to have supper after work.
Well, I just think it's all a bit ridiculous.
The main thing in this, Michelle, is it's all a ramp for us to vote for the dismal policy-free probity of Sir Keir. Yes, he would never do this, go further than a beer, but what does he believe in? Does he have a manifesto? Or is Partygate the only idea he has in town? That's the whole purpose of this media outcry. If you look at The Guardian just today, they've got a whole interactive timeline of how many people died on each day and how many people went to this party and that party. It's more statistics like in COVID, but even worse. That's not the issue. The issue is the contempt they have for people, and people have rightly, very very angry about this, and they rightly detect what Lee says, which is that the COVID policy was not worth the paper it was printed on.
Yeah,
that it was completely over the top, and that they, as Lee says, they probably didn't believe in it themselves. They weren't even thinking about them.
They certainly didn't believe in it. Look at Dominic Cummings. I mean, I don't believe in this conspiracy stuff, but I do. I mean, I absolutely agree with James and Lee. This is about one rule for us and another rule for them, and nothing has made it plainer than the behaviour of Downing Street. And if you listen to Dominic Cummings, when he got COVID, what did he do? He went straight into Downing Street because he was too important not to go. I mean, it is, you see it over and over again.
But what do we think of all this Rishi Sunak business then? You know, James has just been saying there, he thinks it's appalling. Is essentially, I'm going to, you know, simplify it, kept his options open, if you like. But also, there's been calls today, which I think are ludicrous, obviously, that he should be making his tax returns public.
Actually, when Boris became Mayor of London, he made his tax returns public. In America, Trump is the first president who didn't make his tax returns
Would you make
public.
yours public, Scarlett?
Yes. I mean, I don't have a problem with my tax returns.
Right.
But
Are you
actually,
saying that if that anybody who doesn't declare their taxes to the public probably does have a problem?
No,
if you're not,
no. What I'm saying is there is a real problem with Rishi Sunak and his tax, right? Nobody
is there.
Well,
how do you know?
Because
it's a problem with his attitude.
Because his wife actually managed to save millions a year by declaring herself.
But hang on, because you've just said your exact statement was there is a problem with Rishi Sunak's tax. You then go on to say because his wife,
his family, family.
I just think this is all getting out of control. Really, Lee? Do we want to be a society where public servants have to? I mean, I laugh because I just think it's ludicrous. I honestly, sometimes I sit here and I think, what is even going on in the world that we now live on? I just think so much of it is bizarre. But anyway, do we want to live in the kind of country where if you want to get into public office, you've got to declare your tax returns? Really?
There's all kinds of... When you enter Parliament, you have to enter your economic interests on the register of members' interests. And there's a reason for that, is that we think that when you enter public office, you should be serving your constituents.
Correct.
And not serving your own private interests. And so we want to know what those private interests are.
By way of your personal tax return, because you've just said quite rightly, there's checks and balances in place already, many of which are public. So why do we need this extra layer of, I would call it invasion, personal invasion?
Actually, all I said was I'd be quite willing to have mine, and that Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor of London, had his. And I just think that there's been queries over Rishi Sunak and his family tax for some days, and each time we get near it, so you know, first of all, his wife says, "Well, I'm a non-dom," as though you have to be a non-dom. Many people actually choose to pay tax rather than be a non-dom, and then we find out about the green card, and then we find out just how much money they were saving.
I think again, the problem is this total personalisation of politics. The issue, surely, is that we have a tax code that allows something like 120,000, 130,000 people to benefit from non-domiciled tax status and thereby evade paying national taxes. Now, that is the problem. That's the fundamental problem.
They don't evade paying national taxes. They pay taxes on this country, on income earned in this country. What they don't have to do is pay tax in this country on income earned abroad. And by the way, because I need to go back to Darren McCaffrey at the moment, because apparently he's got a riveting update on the latest for us.
More interesting than tax, Miss.
Yeah, and nothing is more interesting than tax, James. But I will pause that for now. But I just think I would not share my personal tax returns with a nation, would you? I mean, if you want to put good, decent people off entering politics, I mean, you're going the right way about it, if you ask me. But let me know your thoughts. Darren McCaffrey, apparently you have something fascinating to update us on when it comes to the whole Partygate Boris Johnson situation.
Yeah, hello, Michelle. I was talking, wasn't I, a little earlier about what the Prime Minister had to say during that interview with journalists in the last hour or so. Just getting a bit more detail about what he did have to say. Of course, we know that he has paid the fine now in full, but also that he has apologised, essentially, for that party, though he insists that it was a brief gathering in the cabinet room at around 2 p.m. that lasted for less than 10 minutes. And he says, rather interestingly, and this is his line of defence, of course, about accusations that he has misled Parliament, because back in November and December last year, he repeatedly said that all the guidance was followed, that no rules were broken. And that also he was told that no rules were broken. Well, his defence in all of this, he says, in all frankness, at that time, it did not occur to me that this might have been a breach. But concedes, and this is also the important point, that the police have found otherwise, and I fully respect the outcome of their investigation. So it boils down to, I suppose, fundamentally that question that Theresa May was asking the Prime Minister back at the end of January, that there are only two real answers to what had gone on with the parties in Downing Street. Either the Prime Minister had imposed these rules but not quite understood them and thus broke them inadvertently, or that he had broken them deliberately and was misleading Parliament. His defence is clearly the former, though that doesn't get away from those questions that if the Prime Minister didn't understand the rules, how the hell were the rest of us meant to understand them, particularly at a time when people, of course, got fined up and down the country. So the Prime Minister saying that he takes full responsibility, that he apologises, but in the end he did it thinking that he was not breaching the rules, but that behaviour inside Downing Street, given the scale of the parties, has and will continue to change.
Darren McCaffrey, thank you very much. Got to be honest, I'm not sure how much longer I can talk about a cake for. Stuart has messaged in and said, Dewbs, give it up. Basically, you're losing this argument. Well, I think personally, I think I'm speaking pretty good sense, quite frankly. Maybe I'm just suffering from delusions of grandeur. There's a poll running on our Twitter account right now saying, should Boris Johnson resign? Yes, say 31% of you. No, say a sensible 68%. Let me know your thoughts. Keep them coming. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. When we come back, I want to talk about the latest on Ukraine. I want to talk about all the goings on in China. I'm telling you, you won't believe your eyes when you see some of this and more. So I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. I'm just looking at some of your emails coming in. You do make me chuckle, I have to say. Lots of you think I'm talking absolute nonsense and completely disagree with you. Disagree with me, should I say. I think other people, probably like my mum, think that I'm talking great sense. But there's a real strong sense here. And, I'll be honest, I think actually you are in kind of two sides of the fence. You know, some people are saying in capital capitals. Jennifer puts it in capitals. No, Boris shouldn't resign. We should all move on. But lots of people are saying this is fundamentally wrong. I'll be reading out some of your emails in just a few minutes. But for now, let's move on. Let's talk about Ukraine, shall we? Because there's been, lots of press reporting today that chemical weapons on Mariupol might have been used. The UN has called for investigation into the violence against Ukrainian men and women as well. Lee, I'm going to pick up with you on this because this talk about chemical weapons, I mentioned earlier, the Britain's Armed Forces Minister said, and I'm reading this as a direct quote, that all options are on the table if this is found to be true, the use of chemical weapons. Liz Truss has said that this would be a callous escalation. I have to say, this suggestion comes from the Azov Battalion, who are not the nicest of people. I'm trying to pick my words carefully.
Neo-Nazis.
Your thoughts? Neo-Nazis, there you go. There you go.
That'll do.
What's your thoughts on all of this?
I think it's a potentially really incendiary and inflammatory claim, because what we've seen in recent weeks is Western capitals sort of laying the ground for a potential intervention if Russia were to use chemical weapons. So there have been warnings since around the 10th of March that Russia is going to use chemical weapons. And in fact, intelligence officers admitted to NBC, the American news channel, that they released this intelligence into the public, even though there was no evidence of any chemical weapons being deployed anywhere near Ukraine. And then on the 25th of March, President Biden spoke at the NATO summit and threatened to respond in kind. I don't think he quite meant that, but to respond in kind if chemical weapons were used. So what we've seen is the West drawing a red line to say if chemical weapons are used, all options are on the table, as the Armed Forces Minister is now saying, which could mean greater NATO intervention in the conflict and therefore an escalation of the conflict, maybe direct conflict with Russia. So they've drawn that red line. And then, as you say, the Azov Regiment is the one that has said chemical weapons have been used against us. And they are the ones that want to draw NATO into this war directly to try to tilt the balance against the Russians. So this is, I think, an extraordinarily dangerous moment in what is an extremely dangerous conflict.
James?
Well, I agree with that. I think the other side of it is, which I'm sure Lee and Scarlett would concur with, is there does appear to be little that can stop Putin, at least at the level of, or the Kremlin, at least at the level of intentions. They are not just aggressive in tone, they are aggressive in action, and where it will end, it's difficult to say. As it happens, Michelle, Russia said that it had destroyed all its chemical weapons under the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons regime in 2017. Its record in Syria, while controversial, does not exactly inspire confidence, or at least the Syrian regime's record conniving with the Russians on chemical weapons doesn't inspire confidence. We have to look at it in the round. The US has continuously postponed the deadline when it will destroy all its chemical weapons. The Russians used to have 40,000 tons of them, horrible stuff. The Americans still have 715 tons. I'm not saying that's equivalent to what's going on, it's completely separate. But when we think of napalm in the Vietnam War, there's a case to answer on the West side, not just on the Russian side. Right now, Russia is the main problem, and there's no doubt of that. At the same time, the West isn't helping any. When they say, all options are open, Putin might call their bluff. It's deliberately vague. They've been vague from the start. And, unless they show a bit more steel, Putin will run rings around them because they don't have the determination that they need.
And I mean, you mentioned Vietnam and napalm, and I've been to Vietnam, I've been to the War Museum that's there, and anyone that's been will find this is like an area, like a room, and it's the most bizarre thing because it's all about how the prisoners of war were treated, which most people would say was probably pretty appalling. But yet when you're in this museum, there's pictures of them playing football, having Christmas dinner and all this kind of stuff. So actually, when it comes to propaganda, Scarlett, and messages being given to us and presented to us in a certain way, we have got to be so careful here because the ramifications of what could potentially happen next are immense. We have to make sure that we are absolutely crystal clear on what is going on.
Oh, yeah, no.
It's absolutely terrible. And like Lee, I was appalled when the Americans admitted that they didn't check everything before saying it, but would put out things as propaganda. For instance, that the Chinese might be selling weapons to Russia, actually as a shot across the bows when they had no idea that it was true. And what has always been really dangerous is that Ukraine becomes the middle. The pawn in the middle of Russia versus NATO. And actually, like you, having been to the War Museum in Vietnam and having travelled through Vietnam, there is no excuse for us ever using chemical weapons. I don't care what the Russians have done, and I think they have behaved appallingly, and they are certainly the aggressors. I don't think there is any excuse for the Americans using chemical weapons against them. And I think, like James, I think the Americans should have destroyed their chemical weapons. I think we should have no chemical weapons. I think it's absolutely dreadful. And of course, I mean, you know, this is what happened in Kosovo with the Kosovo Liberation Army, is of course the Ukrainians want to bring NATO into it. That is the only way that they're going to win. But actually, NATO has to work out what they are really going to do.
But I feel we have this conversation frequently, and sometimes I feel like a stuck record, particularly on this topic, because I'm frequently saying, Lee, that I get concerned because this is such, it's an awful, barbaric situation that we're seeing in Ukraine. We see all this imagery. You know, we're hearing stories now about how many women, you know, how women have been treated. It's so emotional, and any right-thinking person, when you're seeing these images, you know, they hurt you, they galvanise you to want to do something because you want to help. But then it's the flip side of this is, you know, Putin is, you know, well, what is Putin? Putin is somebody who wants what he wants and seems very content and clear on taking action. And it just worries me, the emotional response that a lot of people seem to be exhibiting when it comes to how deeply Britain, the UK, should get involved. What's your thoughts?
I mean, I've never seen anything quite like it when it comes to a conflict. If you think back to the Iraq War, for example, it was hugely controversial. This country was split down the middle. And there are lots of people that were openly questioning the US and UK claims about weapons of mass destruction, quite rightly, as it turned out, that this was absolute false. The intelligence had been fixed around the decision to go to war. And many people realised then that the government would, in fact, lie to them over questions of foreign relations. And some people, you know, when I was on that march as a young student, I met people that had never gone on a march before in their life. And they'd realised for the first time in their lives that their government might lie to them. And you might think, well, that's incredibly naive. But it did change the way that people thought about foreign policy in this country. And I think for the better, in the sense that we shouldn't simply just accept in a trusting way absolutely everything authorities wish to say, because in the context of war, there's always an information war that goes alongside the military campaign, which is designed to create a consensus and create public support for a particular course of action. And with Ukraine, what we've seen is the total success of that operation. And obviously, what the Russians are doing is brutal and barbaric, and they give the West plenty of information and material to use. But we've also got to be incredibly careful because, as we say, with this particular example, it clarifies the issue that we should be thinking about. Who is making these reports? Can we trust what they're saying? What is their interest in making these kinds of claims? So we need to very carefully judge these claims.
But these, you know, let's just call it what it is. We mentioned this anyway. A collection of neo-Nazis that are quite outwardly what they are. They're seemingly quite proud of it. Zelensky himself described them as, well, basically, they just are what they are, words to that effect. And I find it so peculiar that they're just kind of allowed to operate and be there. And in this instance, their claims would be reported before they've even been verified. Because to me, I would take this bunch of people and absolutely want to verify anything that came out of their mouths before I even thought about publishing it. James?
Well, I think that's right. And Lee is entirely right. I think you could sum up the media information war as two things. Terrible pictures of people going through hell and utterly the emotional register, plus a glib demonisation of Putin. I mean glib not because he is a good guy, but because we need analytical tools to rise above the individual incident, to rise above the Biden fudge and the, all options are on the table. We really need to get underneath this dispute. And people like Fergal Keane and Olga Guerin on the BBC and elsewhere insist on just trying to confront us with the need to cry or explode or stuff like that, and then some demonology. It won't do. The stakes are too high for that. People are dying, and we need serious, sober, and cool debate on it.
We most certainly do. Do you think we're having that? Do you think we're getting that across the media generally?
Not from the media.
Yeah, I don't mean GB News. I mean just generally. Are we getting cool, calm debate, or is it led, understandably, by the way, by emotion? Let me know your thoughts. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Scarlett, I know you want to come in, but just for time reasons, I'm going to take a quick break and move on to a different story. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the goings-on in Shanghai. They're mind-blowing, I can tell you. That is for sure. We'll have that and more in just a couple of minutes. Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs and Co. with me, Michelle Dewberry. Quick reminder, by the way, as to who it is keeping me company on my panel tonight till 7. James Woodhousen, the visiting professor at London South Bank University. Lee Jones, who's a professor of political economy and international relations, and Scarlett Maguire, who's a former Labour advisor. We're just discussing Ukraine there, and I've just had an email come through. You didn't leave your name, by the way, so I'm not sure who you are, but you said, Michelle, the Azov Battalion are not neo-Nazis. Do not be so naive. How could you fall so easily? So easily is in bold there for emphasis. How could you fall so easily for Russian propaganda and try to demonise people who are fighting for their lives? Well, what I would say back to you is that, you know, you could just spend a couple of minutes looking into the Azov Battalion just to understand who they are. For example, I think there was Newsnight's reports done on this group of people quite some time ago. Just a very short Google, I'm sure, will show you what they are and who they are. Anyway, let's move on, shall we? Almost 25 million people in Shanghai are in the second week of a strict lockdown after a surge in Omicron cases. This is the first time that Shanghai has imposed such strict restrictions. I would call them bonkers, ludicrous, deluded restrictions, but it says strict there, so I'll read the word strict out. Anyway, the measures include people being confined to their homes. You have to order in food and drink delivered by the government. I'll pick up with you, James, because what is going on here is it's like some kind of bizarre movie. They are taking babies and children away from their parents. They are having blocks of people, and you can go down, you get a couple of nominated people that can put their what they call like hazmat suits on or whatever to pick up deliveries. They're quarantining people. They're apparently killing the animals of people that have tested positive for COVID. And for what? Well, to try and get the place down to zero COVID, which in my mind is just not going to happen.
Well, there's still plenty of advocates of zero COVID in the UK medical establishment. I hope this will give them pause. You know, it really is lockdown Boris politics, but about 5 times worse. They're going through hell. They're not being bombed and missile struck like in Mariupol, but it's, you know, to not get food or drink for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, you know, to be confined to quarters. I talked to a mate in Shanghai just at the weekend, and I mean, the guy looks grey as a sheet. You know, it's really, really bad. Now, what we can learn from this is that under the surface, a lot of dissent is growing, and not just about COVID in China. The Chinese Communist Party's infallibility is certainly coming under the magnifying glass. There's been some dissent already. You know, senior professors and other people torn apart from their mothers and so on, who are in their 90s, not allowed to see them die and all of this. So Shanghai, which has always been somewhat independent of Beijing and always the most cosmopolitan and internationally minded of the Chinese major cities, could well be, not this year, not next year, but it's going to come where the CCP's rule is challenged, and that will be a great day for the world.
Yeah, indeed. And I was hoping, actually, whilst we're having this conversation, just to share with you some kind of imagery and footage, etc., of what's going on there. So hopefully we'll be able to do that as we're speaking. But Lee, your thoughts?
Well, as you say, it's a lunatic policy. Zero COVID attempts to eradicate the disease once it has escaped a small group of people was totally impossible. So the whole policy of lockdowns and confining the disease, trying to eradicate it and contain it, was based on the success of doing that with SARS in 2003-04. And that was possible because you could very quickly identify who had it, because there wasn't very much in the way of asymptomatic cases or transmission. And so you could identify those people, trace their contacts, quarantine them, and contain the disease. COVID, novel coronavirus that erupted in late 2019, is a very different kind of disease, much more transmissible, and it affects most people very mildly, or in many cases no symptoms at all, and so it spreads much more easily. So once it had spread out of the city of Wuhan and internationally, I think basically the gig was up and you couldn't really contain it anymore. But the World Health Organization endorsed China's approach of lockdown, and so it's spread around the world as a policy model to follow. But what we've learned since is that that was an irrational policy, because you cannot contain it. Eventually, it will spread. So the moment that you start to lift restrictions, it spreads in the community because it's already circulating. The only way that you could absolutely restrict it and get it down to zero would be to engage in a lockdown so brutal that the cost would be completely off the scale. And that's what we're seeing today in Shanghai. So every other country in the world that has had some success in limiting the community spread in the first place by sealing borders, so Australia, New Zealand and so on, they eventually realised they couldn't have zero COVID either, because eventually it slips in and it spreads, especially when Omicron came along. China's now the only country, I think, in the world that is now clinging to this fantasy idea of zero COVID with enormous economic and social costs.
Scholar?
It's completely mad, isn't it? I mean, we know from our experience that zero COVID is a non-starter. And now that New Zealand, which I have to say is 2 little islands, unlike China, which is massive, couldn't do it. Australia couldn't do it. So it is impossible. It is completely impossible for China to do it. What Shanghai is trying to do is absolutely terrifying. And you do wonder, James, if there's another reason for it. I mean, given that we know zero COVID doesn't work, we've learnt a lot about
control.
The reason is clear. It is about control, and I think a lot of this was about social control, but it is also about the fate of Xi Jinping. So he has, to begin with, when the disease spread, there was quite a lot of covering up and non-compliance with the disease control mechanisms, and the centre came down very hard and said, we're going to eradicate this. And so the top level leaders in the country, their prestige and authority became tied to the policy goal of suppressing the disease. So it's now very difficult for him to climb down the ladder, right? Because he will look bad. He's staked everything on this. And the costs that he's imposed on the country to do this, I mean, this lockdown in Shanghai could lower GDP by 4%. I mean, that shows you what a contribution Shanghai makes to the country. So the costs have been immense. And when and we've seen it in this country the same, when you are so invested in a policy, when you have made immense sacrifices, it's the sunk cost fallacy, right? I've been doing this and I've paid enormous costs, and the cost is so high I can't admit that I was wrong.
He's got the same on Taiwan, as it happens, where you make a promise and then you've got to live up to it. China's other big shocking mistake, although maybe not so shocking, is that although they can be good innovators, they're not all plagiarists. They have failed to develop a vaccination program.
Yeah.
And that's the thing
that... An effective vaccination program.
An effective, one that works, I mean, That's one thing we did right. You know, a whole lot better than they ever did. And because they won't vaccinate, they're now forced to these draconian measures.
And actually, what's so interesting, so there were two completely different schools of thought. There was zero COVID and there was herd immunity, neither of which worked. And actually, it does seem the only way to deal with COVID, if it gets any worse, and maybe it won't, is that actually it is vaccination. I mean, the other two extremes just don't work. Herd immunity never stood a chance, like zero COVID.
I mean, herd immunity is not a policy. Herd immunity is simply the end state that you reach when enough people have either developed immunity through having the disease or through being vaccinated.
Having had it twice, I mean, with a lot of people I know having twice. I mean, the problem is that herd immunity doesn't work because COVID changes. It's not a policy, but it was a policy that was thought of, and Sweden possibly really wanted it to work.
Well, I think Sweden has come out of this a lot better than most of the European countries by managing it in a more, with precision, public health. So adopting modest restrictions on social activity and trying to shelter as much as possible the people really at risk, and avoiding the total crippling lockdowns that the UK endured. And I think, you know, the data's now coming out to show that they suffered, you know, less excess mortality as a result, and obviously less economic damage and so on. But the other issue around vaccination is they've done very poorly at vaccinating the elderly. So there's immense vaccine hesitancy among the old in China. That's why so many people are dying in Hong Kong. So they've rolled out a vaccine that is much less effective than the Western vaccines, and then they haven't succeeded in vaccinating the most at-risk groups. So there remains a very serious possibility that, you know, eventually this virus will circulate. Eventually, everybody is going to get COVID at some point.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is, if you're old and you haven't been vaccinated, that's a real danger to you.
Yes.
Indeed. Well, there you go. I mean, do spend some time having a look what's going on in China if you get some spare time. I personally found it horrifying. Anyway, I'm pleased to end the show by saying that I found some people that agreed with me. So excellent. Jerry says, Michelle, I totally agree with you about Partygate. Judith says, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Michelle, about Partygate. That's what I like. And just to end it, and I might as well end it with a little hat trick, Rita says, you are the only one speaking any sense tonight. Yes, Rita, yes, that's what I say. Anyway, have yourselves a very good evening. James, Scarlett, Lee, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your company, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Warmer and brighter weather is on the way for the Easter weekend, but for the next 24 hours we'll see further outbreaks of rain moving north before clearing, showers breaking out elsewhere and a lot of cloud, particularly overnight. At the moment, low pressure sits to the southwest of the UK. That's been drawing up some warm weather across southern parts of the country, but also bands of rain, and there's one band in particular that is going to persist across much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England overnight, whilst showers continue for Western England as well as Wales. Elsewhere, some clear spells and mostly dry towards the east of England, the far northwest of Scotland, but whether you've got the cloud or the clear spells, it's going to be a frost-free start, a mild start to Wednesday, but a fairly gloomy start. You can see the extent of the cloud, a lot of low cloud, mist and hill as well as coastal fog to wake up to. And it's a slow start, really, with that cloud continuing until lunchtime in many places. Eventually it lifts and breaks, so the skies do brighten up. The rain in the northeast also starts to peel away. And away from the northeast, where it stays on the cool side, temperatures fairly widely up to 15 to 18 Celsius, with the potential for 22 Celsius somewhere around London. Any showers that develop in the south soon fade away as Wednesday comes to a close, and then during the early hours of Thursday, clear spells for a time, but there'll be further areas of low cloud, mist, hill fog, coastal fog creeping back in. So again, a frost-free but gloomy start to Thursday. There will be some sunshine around, particularly towards the north and the east. And where we've got the areas of cloud, well, they'll start to lift and break up as